Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and this video is a long discussion between me and MassTransit creator Chris Patterson. Now, Chris recently announced that MassTransit is going commercial from version 9 onwards, and I want to bring Chris on the channel to ask a few questions that you might want to ask as well, such as what does the change look like for existing users, pricing, company sizes, licensing, and so much more. Now, because I don't want to interrupt the interview, I'm just going to announce here in the beginning that it's DomTrend's second birthday, and we're celebrating with a 40% discount across the entire website. Courses, bundles, workshops, and DomTrend Pro are 40% off with code BIRTHDAY2. Link is in the description down below, and now just enjoy this discussion. So, Chris, welcome to the video. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Nick?
I am good. How's the last week and a half been for you?
The week and a half. Well, there was April 2nd, and then there was the week that followed.
Yeah.
and and it was a bit hectic. Yeah. I mean, by Friday it had tapered down. I think the news cycle kind of spun and everybody was ready for the weekend, but yeah. That was a busy week.
The 2nd of April was a very interesting day. I think it should be like National Open Source dotnet Day or something, because like Jimmy comes out and everyone is like on Jimmy's mediator and not on Mopper announcement. And then obviously you post about it, you release. Or did it happen the other way? No, I think Jimmy announced first, right? Yes, because he made the blog post.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
you.
Jimmy was first.
And everyone was on Jimmy. And they go, wait, what? And people were thinking, oh, it's a troll post because Jimmy announced it. So wouldn't it be funny if someone says MassTransit? And people were checking, well, it must be the 1st of April in some country in the world. So,
Right.
But no, you both were very cautious of like, this is the 2nd of April. This is real. It's not a joke. And I would have expected Jimmy's announcement to be a joke, given what he said like a month before. That's like, these projects will never be commercial ever. And then the announcement came out, which sort of felt reactionary to me, but I'm going to have to talk to Jimmy about that. But with you, I kind of expected the move of MassTransit becoming a commercial project, because you've been working with Drew Sellers for quite some time. And I've worked with Drew. I don't know if you still work with Drew, but I think you do. And I've worked with him when I was working for my last company on Elasticsearch stuff. And I know when Drew is in the thing, there's something commercial going on. I don't know if that started as the commercial support you're selling, and then it's like, okay, we're going to turn this into a paid product or not. But I could see it happening that way because MassTransit is just so popular. It's the most popular messaging library in the .NET ecosystem by far. So it was bound to happen. And nobody likes to work for free as well. So I could totally see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, I've offered support for 3 years and I've been working on MassTransit for 3 years fully. And it's really been, I mean, there's been an uptick in interest in support lately, but I've got many support customers and they're great and they're fun to work with, and they really have been driving some of the changes that have been happening in the past few years because, they're the paid customers. They get priority when it comes to like bug fixes, things like that, or even just investigating issues that come up. So yeah, it had been going on the wall. Yeah, Drew and I started MassTransit like 17 years ago. And Drew, if you worked with him in the Elasticsearch place,
Yeah.
you know that he worked for a company that is like operational excellence. I
Yeah.
mean, they knocked it out of the park when it came to like running Elasticsearch in the cloud at scale for their customers as kind of a SaaS platform. And since that endeavor, I know Drew went on and started and created MessageAid, which is kind of a message management, error management, exception management tool. Not just for, the red alert days, but also, the peacetime things like monitoring queues and just making sure the system is healthy. And he's been doing that. We've had discussions as support goes on. We still talk pretty much every other day. I mean, if I go for a walk, it's like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So this has been ruminating for a while. I mean, I looked at doing it last year, and then finally I started to put it together. It's funny you mentioned Jimmy because I like had the whole announcement written up, and I was like, I'm not going to do it on the 1st because that's just mean because people think, oh, it's wrong, and then I say it's not wrong. So I was like, I'll do it on the 2nd, and then I wake up and I see Jimmy's post, and I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
So I texted Jimmy, and I was like, oh, this day's going to hurt.
Yeah, we're going to celebrate next year too. So I didn't know Drew was actually there. Was it from the beginning from MassTransit?
Yeah, so in 2007, we went to one of the first conferences of kind of the open source or alt.net movement down in Austin. And we we set up like a chat room before the thing, and it was like Drew and I kind of met, and we were all much younger then. 2007 is almost 18 years ago,
Yeah.
which is crazy to think about. But we kind of clicked, and in his business and in my business, we were starting to use messaging, and we were like, we looked at something like NService Bus, and we were like, yeah, we get that, but at the time, NService Bus only supported Spring.net, and we were like Castle Windsor fanboys at the time.
Yeah.
So we were like, well, let's just write our own. How hard can it be?
Yeah.
And that's become like the infamous quote that's gone on for years and years. I
Yeah.
mean, how hard can it be? So it's funny. Like last week, Reddit blows up. It's like, oh, just write your own. And I mean, I
Yeah.
almost replied to every one of those. Yeah, how hard can it be?
Yeah, the write your own thing. So I was planning to go into that later. I just want to say one thing. I've worked with Drew. Obviously, I said that in that company was selling Elastic, and it was by far the best partner we worked with. Like the support they were offering and how helpful he was like insane. Very very high quality stuff. So highly recommend him and his work as well. But on the how hard can it be? I saw some messages that said, oh, I can just remove MassTransit and use the direct SDK like right out of the box, and I just do some dead lettering stuff, and that's it. I'm like, well, if it's that easy to take out, you never really needed it in the first place. Like your use case just so simple that what's the point? I guess you found it there. It was free to use, and you can just go and add it. But it's not a big deal. This change is not for you, and it's most likely if you just leave version 8 in there, it's not gonna break. It's just it can do what you want, and it has done that for many many years. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
you're 100% right on that. I mean, version 8 is going to remain open source. You know, it there's no reason to take it out today. It isn't like it's going to disappear overnight or get deleted off the internet. I've assured people that through 2026 I'll continue to patch, and like .NET 10 will come out this fall. It'll support .NET 10. If there's any breaking changes, those will be addressed. EF seems to be the biggest breaker every major LTS release of .NET.
yeah,
So usually I end up having to do that. But .NET 9 was super easy. It's just, the intent isn't to like kill it and, screw people over, so to speak. It's, I want, and there's reasons behind that. When you think about like the NPM ecosystem or just any of these other solutions out there, I think of, and we can talk about the footprint of mass transit later. That I have numbers and details. It's just like mind-boggling when I saw them. But mass transit's used by governments, public entities, commercial enterprises, Fortune 15, Fortune 25, Fortune 100. I mean, it's all over the place. And despite me being Gen X and supposedly not giving a crap about anything, I actually really care about the people using it because these are companies that are depending on it, and they've gotten the benefit of that for this many years. So it's I worry about, if someone forks it and someone goes to a random fork. Well, what's the supply chain integrity there? What's the chance that somebody from a foreign state actor says, oh, well, if this is a chance of turmoil, can we inject some code in there to maybe do some things we won't want to do? Or because if they're just willing to flip to another fork that somebody's built, how do you know that they're going to maintain that? What's their status?
yeah.
So I want to keep that intact and keep that going so that there's always an authentic source for that code base for version 8.
So ultimately, what drove you to make that decision? Because you have been selling commercial support, like we said, for some years now. But now the product itself, starting version 9, will be, you'll have to pay to use it. So what drove you to that?
I mean, it comes down to a financial decision. While I do have quite a few support customers, it isn't sustainable to grow the business and bring in other people. Ultimately, I'm going to want to move on, even though it's been 18 years and I haven't yet, and I have no plans to. But at some point, I'm going to need to move on, either, just due to age reasons or, attention responsibility reasons. And again, these companies are depending on it. So there needs to be an organization that's going to be able to bring that forward and have the sustainability that people want, in a commercial product. And that was the main driver. I mean, if the support revenue was, overflowing and I had buckets of cash in my yacht in the Mediterranean, that would be a different conversation. But that isn't the case because, believe it or not, when things are optional, a lot of people opt out.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And interesting that you say that because I have a question on that optionality later, but I'm going to keep it for later when we talk money. But I want to know, what do you think about the reception in general of the decision and the announcement?
So there's the public that you saw on like Reddit and Twitter, and believe it or not, Twitter was actually balanced. You know, you had some people who were like, "Hey, I fully support this decision. It's a great product. We've used it for years." You know, it's so that's one aspect of it. There were definitely the people like that. This is a betrayal. What about all the contributors? And Mass Transit has. I mean, if you look at the GitHub contributions graph, I'm number one, and Drew from 10 years ago is number two. So it's like,
Yeah.
and then Dennis, who's great and has, he's the one who built the rider support in, um, and was ultimately compensated for that. So,
Yeah.
that was one of those things that's like, as the support money came in and people asked for things, I was able to pay consultants to
Hmm.
build certain things into the framework. And I want to continue that because people have asked for a lot of features and it's like, hey, we want to do this. But back to the question about the reception. Yeah. I mean, Reddit blew up. I think the top 6, 7 things in the .NET forum were all like, mediator,
Yeah.
automapper, mass transit, everything was left and right. So, there was definitely a response. I knew it was expected, but it also made a lot of noise. And what was interesting is the number of people who contacted me directly through the support that says, "Hey, we've been using mass transit for years. We've never had a reason, to use the support, but we want pricing. We want to, how firm is pricing? We want to get this into our budgets for next year." And that's one of the reasons I did it in April, because people start budget, if they're on a half year or a full year budget cycle, I wanted that time, they got 9 months to get it in their budget for
Yeah.
2026. So it gives people plenty of runway, and we could talk about that kind of stuff later. But yeah, the response, I mean, yeah, there was, I didn't get any death threats. There was nothing like that. But some people were very vocal about how this is a betrayal of open source and pulling the rug out from under. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I mean, it's just kind of I watched your video like that came out, and I mean, there's definitely the knee-jerk response, and then I think people settle down, and especially once I added the Q&A where I was like, hey, there's the target prices, and people rise, oh wow, it's not going to be $250,000 a
Yeah.
year,
I
so
think if you made one mistake, and I think so, Jimmy made that mistake too, is you did not launch that post with enough information.
yeah,
Because, yeah, people will say $400 pay per month. Is it? Yeah, per month, and 4,000 if you bill annually.
yeah,
Like, I get it. As a developer, you might think that's a lot of money because it might be 1/5, 1/4 of your salary. But for a company, $400 is not a lot, like, at all. Um, Especially for something that adds value. And that's the biggest point, is if you were to build everything that Mass Transit has to offer, it will cost you way, way more. Even not just for a year, in the long run, because you have to keep maintaining it and updating and so on. And that's just a lot of dev hours. And yeah, I understand in maybe another country that salaries are lower, then it's not that expensive. But for the American market, the UK market, the Western European market, it's really not a big deal. And I know that because I'm running a company as well, and we don't sell something for 4,000 a year, but we sell something for $600 a year, and we get thousands of orders on our offering, because we do add that value back. You're expected to make that money out, and that's ultimately how you should think about pricing. Which is, if I want to make a comment about something comparatively, is why I don't like the Fluent Sessions model, because it is per developer per year. So it sort of penalizes you for having a bigger company, which I don't like. Yes, you're expected to pay more on the enterprise license you're about to launch as well, but it's not based, like Microsoft has, I don't know, thousands of developers. Can you imagine them paying $130 per developer a year for something you don't ultimately even ship to your customers? It just stays for your like pipeline, CI pipeline. So I personally, after I found out about the pricing, this all looks very reasonable to me. And I am someone who doesn't like the end service bus model of pricing at all. I much prefer you have a price, whatever. Maybe you can negotiate a price down or up, but you have a baseline and it's clear, and you go do your thing. So yeah, and if you saw the video, in my reaction, I didn't really take a stance in terms of, oh, that should not have been made commercial. In fact, I said if one of those projects is to go commercial, Mass Transit makes the most sense, because once first gives a lot of value, I think way more than Mediator or Automapper. But it's also once it's out there, it's very hard to pull out. So it's a smart move from you as well, because you're like business to business, businessman to businessman. You're betting on that as well. You're betting that someone is integrated enough that if they want to keep going after 2026, it's too much of a hassle for them to take it out and replace it. So they say, okay, 4,000 a year or 12,000 a year, or pay the developer whatever he's worth or she's worth to replace and write their own. So there's a lot going on here. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. Uh, but I think it's a good move. And I personally, I don't know if people know this. I support projects going paid. In fact, in my opinion, free open source. I'm not gonna say it should not exist, because if you wanna do it as your hobby because you like it, do it. Of course, it's fun. I had the free open source project as well, but the moment I wasn't working for the company that was making me developing that product possible, I just killed it. I just said bye, and I had, I don't know, thousands of companies using it. But it's not sustainable for me to just be there and be like, oh, this is not working and this is not working. Go fix it. I'm like, okay, but who's gonna pay the bill for that? Plus, I'm not even working with the technology anymore, so I don't have the know-how to make this the best it can possibly be. There's so much here going on that people just don't seem to understand. In my opinion, if you want to start an open source project and you really think it adds value, just make it commercial out of the get-go and see how it goes. If people don't buy it, and they would only use it if someone would do free labor on your behalf, then you don't really have a sustainable business model, I think, or sustainable business.
Oh, and that's the thing. Do you have a business or do you have a hobby? That's kind of what it comes down to. And when again, going back to the responses and kind of tying into that, um, free open source. Yeah, if you're starting a new project and it's just a research thing, great. Open source is fine. If you know you're going to get there, maybe go to a dual license model where it's like, hey, if you're just goofing around like me, do this. Um, but what happens, you mentioned, I'm going to work on this open source project and kind of not work on it, and then it's dead. Well, now you've got these companies, and I've been supporting mass transit commercially for 3 years, and a lot of the engagements are on demand. It's just like they don't have a support agreement, but they're like, hey, we're in a bind, we need something, and they can book those online. They can still do that. It's a great way to just get help when you need it. It's kind of like phoning a friend from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Yeah.
It's so, but so when someone says, "Oh, I'll just write my own," so you think of your typical company where you've got a team of 10 devs. You got your 10x that's on the team, that's kind of like the alpha on the team. He's got everybody in the developers kind of follow their lead. They drive the innovation. They bring new technologies in. Every shiny hammer thing they go to, they bring that in and they work on it. And believe it, it wasn't surprising to me, but a lot of the on-demand calls are like, so, Joe used to be on the team, or Joanne used to be on the team, and they brought in mass transit and they really led the team and worked on it. Well, they left 6 months ago because they got a better gig somewhere, they went to Google or something, and now we don't really fully understand this, and without their vision, we're unable to drive it. So can we get like 2 hours of your time for an architecture review to say, hey, are we in the right track? Do we need to update? Are we using these correctly? And so a lot of those teams are stuck. So now you take the, oh, well, we'll just build it ourselves model. So let's say that they do convince their employer to spend 3 months of their time, which is a lot more than the annual license cost, to go and rebuild their own integration directly to the RabbitMQ library. Now they say they get publicity because they blog about it and they maybe throw up a video or two, and now they get hired off by somebody, and now that company's stuck with deadware that's going nowhere because nobody at the company understood it. It was just that person's project. Yeah. So from an employer or a company trying to approve that, I mean, I think that's just like bad news bears.
Yeah. You had the chance, like everyone else, back in 2015, 16, I think, to join the dotnet Foundation. This idea that this umbrella of open source projects, and many people did it, but you did not, from what I can pick up. I don't know if you did but left, but I couldn't find any record of you joining at all. Why didn't you join?
It's a good question. In fact, I think I saw a post on Reddit today where someone asked the very same question, like
Oh,
why did you not join the .NET Foundation? And I looked at it, we talked about it, and I know several of the people that used to be on the board and ran it and chaired it and such. For me, and currently I think it's even more restrictive, but for me it was the IP assignment. I did
yeah.
not want to give away the IP. And I especially was not going to give away the IP without financial compensation. So, it was, it's like the cat meme. It's like, have you been denied treats and not
Yeah.
given financial compensation?
Yeah, yeah. But is that still an issue? Like, do you still have, because this whole
Well,
debacle
now you
happened?
can't take it back.
You can or you can't.
You cannot. From what I understand in reading that thread today, now once you join, you cannot take your stuff back out. So,
Cool.
yeah. So they've like changed the rules, and it just, again, the financial support, and I have to be upfront. Mass Transit has received financial support from Microsoft, from JetBrains, from many companies, either through GitHub sponsors or just, being, project of the year, and that's been great. I mean, that's helped pay for the website, pay for the commercial license for GitHub, those
Yeah.
kind of things it helps pay for. Sometimes it's coffee,
Yeah.
and it's been great because I still do have a bunch of sponsors on GitHub, and they get special access and Discord and all that fun stuff. But when I looked at the .NET Foundation, it's it seemed kind of bureaucratic, and most of the decisions of mass transit are made on a 40-minute walk,
Yeah.
talking on the phone to Drew, or just like, does this make sense? Do I want to go in this direction, or is this kind of a one-off? So it just seemed like a bunch of bureaucracy that I didn't want to have to deal and get caught up with. So I
Yeah.
chose not to join that.
I see. I see. Yeah. The whole foundation situation, even from the big boom that happened a few years ago now, with the ownership, but yeah, it was just a lot. So I've spoken with many people who had the chance to join, and they saw the writing on the wall before anyone else did, and just didn't join. And for what I understand now, it's worse, which I thought it would be better, but I guess I have to
Mm.
update my knowledge on that. Um,
Yeah, it just I didn't see the benefits outweighing just the complexity of
yeah,
of dealing with that bureaucracy. And I mean, I've been a Microsoft MVP for I don't know how many years. I stopped stacking the tokens on the
yeah,
thing because it just got kind of redundant. I think I even said stop sending them because I just don't need them.
yeah,
But that's a great program, and it's nice to be recognized in that. It helps
yeah,
cover my Azure bill every month. So
yeah, yeah. You mentioned the IP assignment to the Donor Foundation. And one of the biggest points of criticism is you did not have a CLA in place for contributions. And even though the vast
right.
majority of the contributions were from you and Drew and Dennis, who was compensated, um, there's a valid point to be made that you're making this change now to make the project commercial benefit from it. But the code is still owned by these people. That code they contributed. So because without a CLA, they still own the copyright for that. Have you thought about that? Have you considered what that means?
I've looked at it, and again, I'm not a lawyer. The typical quote. I'm
Yeah,
not a lawyer,
disclaimer.
but when you contribute code to a repository that's under Apache 2.0, you're contributing it under that license. So whether you wrote it or not, you're contributing it under that license. So I don't see any issue with it. There are some pieces of V8 that likely will not be deployed as a V9.
Mm-hmm.
We've looked at the demographics, we've looked at what people are using. There are some things that won't survive the transition and will die with V8.
I
Just like
see.
with right, like so V7 had support for a bunch of different containers,
Mm-hmm.
AutoFac, Simple Injector, all that stuff. Well, when we released version 8, we said we're solidifying on MSDI. It's where 99% of the world is. And I used to love AutoFac. I mean, there was comments about AutoFac today. It's like I used to love it. I used it on every project, but that was 2012, not 2025 or
Yeah.
2025. Yeah. So I mean, there's concerns, and if anybody, has a concern about it, I'm certainly willing to talk to them about it. It's
Yeah.
not something that I'm against. It's just, my understanding is when you contribute to an Apache 2 project, your contributions are under Apache 2, which means a business entity any entity has the right to fork that code and use it for whatever they want. So
Yeah. So I don't think that.
that's my understanding.
Yeah, I
So,
don't think that this was the concern. The concern was more the code is still not owned by the entity who will publish it. It's still owned by whoever wrote it. Even though it's published under the license, it's protected under the license in terms of who owns it. The CLA that Microsoft has, for example, with .NET, if you have committed code to .NET Core in the past, the thing you sign says that you transfer the IP of the code you wrote to the .NET Foundation, and then they own it. But if you don't have something like that in place, the IP is still owned by you. For example, the CLA from Brighter, which is an alternative, explicitly states that you actually, who is contributing the code, is still owning the code. It's not transferred to Brighter. Now, there is an argument to be made that because you're putting this into an entity, the entity is effectively forking V8 to make V9, and then they can do whatever they want. And that is valid. I think this stands on its own. And I'm sure Exceed with Fluent Sessions would basically do the same thing. Has a lot of lawyers that have looked into this and said, yeah, this makes sense. But it would still be interesting if these people had a say before the change. Now, of course, they did not contribute enough code probably to make this worthwhile, but it's still something that I and other people have noticed and talked about. That is, okay, when projects are to go commercial, what do we do about? Do the contributors give a heads up? Should the CLA be in place from the very beginning? There's just a few things there that are in a bit of a gray area, similar to how, for example, you're using third-party libraries in MassTransit, for example, Martin, Quartz integrations, Hangfire, and more. I'm not going to touch on Cosmos and all the big, AWS or Microsoft libraries, but you are using free open source projects. So is there any plan to give part of the proceeds to donate to these free open source projects, or have you thought about that?
Well, that's an interesting question. When the Martin integration was built, and kudos to Jeremy for getting all these new Wolverine customers that everybody and their brother says they're going to jump to. I almost feel sorry for him because the influx. And I did message him. I said, "Here they come."
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't use Martin. I don't care about Martin. The Martin integration was created because people use Martin. And the download numbers, speak. If you look on NuGet, you can see, and we can see kind of the usage of it. Cosmos is easy, SQL is easy. All of those things, Entity Framework are easy. These edge projects, the integration only exists because people have asked for it.
Yep.
And the code that's the integration is just referencing their package. So I am not shipping Martin. I am not saying use Martin. I'm saying if you're using Martin, you can use MassTransit with it, and that makes it an easy integration, so they don't have to build it themselves.
Yeah.
So like I said, when I'm lighting $100 of bills on fire to start my gas stove, that's a thing we can consider. Is like do these other projects, if they have the trajectory and the growth, who knows what the future holds?
Yeah.
But those integrations, if it came down to, well, you can only integrate with Martin if you pay for the commercial Martin. Well, then we would offer that as like an add-on product. It's like, okay, well, here's the base license. Oh, and if you want to use the Martin integration, it's $25.
Yeah.
The a la carte menu doesn't play well with people. And the focus over the next 1.75 years, that's the runway that I've put in place as far as, people being able to continue to use V8 and likely beyond that, because again, I don't want people forking it and weird stuff happening. But the runway that's provided, the focus right now is on those business customers that we want to convert to version 9. So we're going to keep version 8 going. We want people to be able to use it and not worry about, rug being pulled out from under them, because they can continue to use what they have. And yeah, so I don't know about the compensation of like, Martin or those other products. Dapper, do I continue to support Dapper, or now that EF Core supports the exact same things you can do with Dapper, but in the box, do I just drop Dapper support? Those are the kind of questions that kind of come up. It's like, and those are the decisions we'll be making for version 9 over the next few months. So,
about Wolverine, the obvious alternative to one of the obvious alternatives to MassTransit, and I think Rebus in the same category, and Service Bus. So yes, there will be an influx of MassTransit customers going towards Jeremy's way, absolutely. And Jeremy being very, how do I say this? Let's say short-fused, maybe is a way to put it. He doesn't have a lot of well, let's say if he doesn't like something, he will say it very, very clearly and very, very directly. If you annoy him, you will know very quickly. Yeah, I do kind of feel sorry for him because ultimately this crowd that's going his way just wants a lot of free stuff, and you just expect that the person will do the work for you just because they published something that they did online. Obviously, he has the whole Jasper effects, commercial aspect of it, and some of the features will be premium and so on. So it's a good leads generation tool, which is ultimately what MassTransit is now for the V9 version. But it's very interesting to see how that will go. Do people just jump ship and they go into another free tool, and then they fear that this tool will go commercial, which I think is Jeremy is smart. He will make it commercial too at some point. Do they just write it on their own? Because I've worked with enterprise messaging for quite a few years in massive companies. We're talking billions of dollars processed every year in financial institutions. And at least in my team, even though we use messaging heavily with sagas and everything, we never actually used MassTransit or any library. We just wrote the thing manually using the SDK, super fast processing, never had a problem. And you've said that MassTransit has thousands of companies using it, Fortune 15, Fortune 20, or so on. Do you think MassTransit would have that sort of popularity if it wasn't free? And if it was a commercial thing right at the get-go?
Yeah, that's one of those things that goes down to like market cap and looking at like, what is your market penetration? It's definitely easy to pick up because it is free. People looked, there's no question. And I think it's hard to say. I mean, yes, it's definitely wildly popular because it's free. If you look at the NuGet downloads, we're over like 125 million. The next closest competitor is half that.
Yeah,
And if you go down to some of the other alternatives, they're a flat line. So, it's but those are free also. So it's definitely been around as long. I mean, I think Brighter's been around almost as long. I think they started around 2010.
yeah.
So, it's had a similar longevity. And Ian Cooper is great. I mean, every time I was in NDC London last year, and it was actually sunny, which I hear is rare, but it was.
It's really sunny lately for the past couple of months to the point where my office, because it's on the roof, is really hot, and I
Yeah.
have a little fan.
Yeah, I imagine. But yeah, so I mean, a number of these projects have been around. Mass transit, I think I've done a good job of always being available, which, is a detriment to my life. I mean, people are like, wow, I hit Discord on Saturday night at 9:30 and Chris responded in
Yeah,
like 3 seconds. And I was like, yeah, so I don't have a life. Great. Thank
yeah,
you. Tell me about it. Tell me more. Tell me something I don't know. Um, it's definitely popular because it's free. It's definitely popular because it does a lot. I mean, the Saga state machines, the job consumers that we've recently enhanced, that's like the highest growing feature right now in terms of, people building applications with that. The telemetry that we've seen in the system and the usage, people upgrade quickly, and there's probably a lot of people who don't upgrade quickly. I
yeah,
mean, so, the numbers that we see when we look at that, it's it's used and it's used all over the place. I mean, last we looked, we're in over 105 countries. I mean,
yeah.
how many countries are there on this planet?
Not much more.
I mean, there's a heavy, heavy concentration in Europe. Heavy concentration in the U.S. A lot in Australia. A lot of usage. All throughout. Every major country you can think of is
Yeah,
using it. So, and they're using it. The survey results we did, they most of them are in production. So it isn't like, oh, we're just trying it out or we're kicking the tires. It's, oh, we've had production applications in productions for 4 or more years. So these
yeah,
are companies that, when you talked earlier about the switching cost, yeah, the switching cost is high, especially if you're using sagas, you're using job consumers, you're using all the capabilities of the framework. Those just don't exist anywhere. The Saga State Machine is unique, and I've done hours and hours of videos on my channel. When the
yeah,
pandemic hit, I sat down and just started recording myself live coding because I was bored. There was nobody to talk to, and you couldn't go outside or you would die.
yeah,
So I started doing that channel just to kind of go through it. And yeah, a lot of it was long, and it was just that. But I mean, those were actually originally Twitch sessions that I just converted to YouTube. So it was
yeah,
just like people would join because everybody was looking for human contact
yeah,
because nobody was to talk to. So it definitely blew up. then it started showing up on like channels like your channel,
Yeah.
other channels on YouTube, and people started talking about it. And so then the influx came in, and with that came the people. More people are dropping into Discord, more people are asking questions. People are creating issues, asking questions. Things that aren't really related to the framework, but like, how do I do this kind of stuff? So the amount of time I was spending more and more helping people get started with the framework started to kind of eat away at the time that I could work on the framework. So, but yeah, it's wildly popular. There's no question about that. And for the most part, the community is great. You
Yeah.
mentioned, about people switching and the entitlement of, oh, you're doing this for me, go do this, and do that. I mean, there are some of those, and those are the days I just got to like step back for a minute and say, okay,
Yeah.
this is, there's 10 nice people for this one person who expects me to do everything for them. And maybe it's just a different in culture, different in
Yeah.
language, whatever. So I have to work through that on a regular basis. But all in all, it's been super rewarding building open source, and that's why I'm going to great lengths to make sure that the community is still able to, see the benefits of mass transit, but also make it so that the companies that they're working for are able to sustain the project when the one vocal person on the team leaves or goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
So,
On the free aspect of mass transit, you've outlined the pricing, which small, medium sized, whatever that means, it's not clear. $400 US dollars per month or 4,000 billed annually. An enterprise, $1,200 monthly, and then $12,000 billed annually. Do you have any clear sort of outline of what is small to medium size, what is an enterprise?
um, a lot of the emails I've been getting lately are some of those questions. You have company. When I think of, and I've kind of tried to revisit this a little bit and just kind of think and like, what are the true segments? I mean, this is a developer tool. It's used by the teams to build their applications quickly, save their company money, all that fun stuff. It's it's a question of, I live in America where a small is like a 22-ounce drink. You
Yeah.
go to Europe, a small is like 8 ounces.
Yeah.
So, we like things big here, especially
Yeah.
in Texas. So, um, so it's I left it kind of nebulous because I don't know for sure yet. When I think of like a team of 10 developers, working on a couple repos, pushing products to support their back end business, whether it's an intranet app, whether it's something that they use to connect to their customers, to me, that's a small.
Yeah.
That's just one team. Now, some people are like, "Oh, well, I'm an individual developer and I build software for nonprofits." Well, that's a special case. I mean, that's something that, you know, I stated earlier, we're focusing on the companies that are of a certain size at this point because version 8 is going to remain supported. So if you're one of those individual developers building software, that's like a really small, almost like a tiny. What are the sizes on AWS EC2 containers? You got like a tiny
Yeah.
instance. That's tiny. Maybe you have $60,000 a year in revenue. Ultimately we're going to come up with a solution for that. We don't know what it is yet. It might be just like a low cost annual fee where it's an individual developer license,
Mhm.
for like that. So that's where we're kind of thinking there. When I think of small, medium, I'm thinking like the one dev team, or maybe, it's a couple Scrum teams on the same technically product team that, push to the same backlog, push to the same. These are the things that just, if you feel small, say you're small. If
Yeah.
you're big and you know that you have like seven development teams of 6 developers that are pushing, a number of different projects, that's, kind of tripping into the large category.
Yeah.
And especially if you're doing, $1 or $10 million a year in revenue, think about, what, makes sense there. The trickier one, and the one that I'm still trying to sort out, which I don't think it's going to be crazy, a lot of consulting companies and agencies use mass transit to build for their customers.
Yeah.
It's a benefit for yeah, I mean the customers benefit because they're not paying somebody to build mass transit.
Yeah.
They're able the time to value, and they're paying for business value, not infrastructure. Mass transit is infrastructure whether you
Yeah.
like it or not. And as I've said for the last 15 years, infrastructure is not business value. You do not make money off infrastructure unless you are an infrastructure company. If
Yeah.
you're AWS, infrastructure is your business. If you're, you know, Robin Health or, so and so shipping company, infrastructure is not your business value. Your business value is what you provide as products and
Yeah.
services to your customers that are for your domain. So consulting companies and agencies building these applications, they they've helped with the growth of mass transit, and I want to make sure that we can continue to work with those. I have good relationships with several consulting orgs, and their consultants praise mass transit to their customers. I don't want them to have to like put a burden on their customers to say, oh well, the customers have to pay for it. I want that agency to just basically have license to say, hey, we use mass transit to build our customer applications, and that's how we do it.
So who
And
who pays there? Is the customer paying? Is the agency supposed to pay? Who's paying?
well, the agency would be the developers. So I think if they have just an annual license to grant all of their developers, the ability to use and deploy applications with mass transit, I think that's the best way to do it.
Okay.
Now, if they want to then charge their customers and deal with that, that's how they charge that back or work that into their pricing.
Yeah.
They pay for Jira, they pay for
Yeah.
Teams and all that. It just seems like if it's something they're using to build value for their customers, how they build that out.
Yeah.
And that's why I've got to have those conversations. I work a lot with improving. I want to talk to them and say, hey, how do you guys use this? And just figure that out. It's not going to be crazy money. It's really just kind of like maybe a large plus, but
Hmm.
I want to make sure that because it's a benefit to me because they're getting the product out there and they're enjoying it. Um, and it's also, these agencies and consultancies, they generally don't use a lot of tier one, two tier support. When someone from one of those companies calls me with a question about mass transit, it's because it's like some deep thing that they
Yeah.
just need to understand before they go forward. So,
So let's say I'm a hobbyist, and I have like a newsletter. You can put your email in. I save it on my database, and then I publish a message with MassTransit to send you an email to like welcome you, whatever.
mhm.
I don't make any money. It's non-commercial use. Do I have to pay a license?
That's what we're trying to figure out. I mean, and why version 8 still exists.
Yeah.
You could do that with version 8 with the current feature set. So if I was a hobbyist and I was dinking around, I would just be like, yeah, I'll just use version 8 because it's free.
Mhm.
Why would I use version 9? It supports dotnet 12 or whatever it happens to be at the time.
Yeah.
Maybe I just use that. If I need some of the features of version 9 or I just want to be current, that's where we may come up with like an individual license that's just like, what is it? I think Apple charges you $100 a year to write code onto their
Yeah.
device. Is it something like that? I don't know. Maybe we do an early thing where it's like, the uptick and on ramp because people, believe it or not, people still watch your old videos and say, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to pull this," and they fork the sample or whatever, and they kind of create it up. So I don't want to discourage that, and version 8 is going to continue to support that. Will there be a non-commercial version of version 9? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, we're almost 2 years from any
Yeah.
sort of decision tree on that. So
But the project will not be out in 2 years. It will be out sooner. V9.
version 9 is expected to be out Q1 2026,
Yeah.
and some pre-release packages towards the end of the year. It
Okay.
just depends how we go.
Okay. Now, what's a bit unclear reading about you talking about this topic is will V9 be open source?
Probably.
That's what you said, but it's like, what does probably mean? So it means it can also probably be closed source.
So I don't see a reason to close the source as long as the license is followed. I mean, there are people who are going to fork version 8
Yeah.
and use it for their own. I mean, there's like 2,000 forks already. So whether that's just research or whether I think most people, based on the download rates, use the official NuGet packages. So there may be some people that grind it into their own code base and build their own, and that's their business. I mean, there's companies that have their own supply chain rules where they can't pull in updates. So it will most likely be open source exactly where it is today on GitHub.
Okay.
I mean,
So your worry is because from what I understand, you're gonna have to write some mechanism that checks for a license key or something.
that's code. That code is already in mass transit and has been there. It's just
Right.
not currently triggered.
Right.
So, and
So.
I'm already able to generate license keys. So when I released the SQL transport, I was originally going to do it as an optional add-on that
Hmm,
required a license.
okay, I see.
And so I put all that code in there and just never, it's dark launched. It's in there. It's just not used by anything because it's not
Right.
checked. And we
So
decided to ultimately release the SQL transport for free.
Got it. So the worry is if it's open source, someone can just pluck that out, build the package, release, not pay a license, and you wouldn't know about it.
Did you know that people pirate video games and
I,
download those too?
I know, but and that's exactly my point. My point would have been, you will not prevent with .NET being compiled
They can
into IE.
decompile it
Yeah,
anyway.
you, and even if it's obfuscated, like I am a lot into game server emulation, not World of Warcraft, but another MMO. And one of my favorite things to do is when someone makes a library of like their server that has like a key check or whatever, I just go, it's in Java, I just go and I remove it like for fun because it takes 10 minutes and it's always fun to see what developers came up with to protect their
Sure.
files, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So my worry is if the project is closed source, if someone wants to remove the key check, they will. Now,
And if it's open source and they want to remove the key check, they will.
exactly. So you're not actually in danger per se because the companies who will have to pay will be too scared to do anything dodgy.
Right.
So for me, it would still be a benefit to the community for the project to still be open source. I understand.
100% agree.
Yeah, I understand that this comes with some drawbacks, but you see it with I think it's Image Shop that the Image Shop guy has complained about people not paying licenses when clearly the project is used. But it's like you said, do you know that people pirate video games? Like,
And movies too, apparently.
yeah, I have never heard of that. I don't know what you're talking about. Actually, back in the day, as a kid, I used to pirate like an amazing amount of games. But now that I'm doing better, by now I mean 12 years now or 13 years now, that I can actually afford a game to play. I go out of my way to actually pay for it because I know for the developer this is what will make the next game as well great. And ultimately, if enough people don't pay for MassTransit version 9, there won't be a version 10. Simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that for sure.
So
No, there's always gonna, the problem with pirating video games now is it usually comes with a bunch of payload triggers that you don't know about that are dark on your machine until
yeah,
the botnet activates them.
yeah,
No, I mean, I had Copy 2 PC. I had Locksmith. That tells you how old I was. We used to
yeah,
copy Ultima on floppies. It was a long time ago. Cartridges made it harder, but then when the CDs came out, it was just,
yeah,
you get the mod chip for your PlayStation. People are going to steal. Companies generally don't. And
yeah,
if they do, are they really a company or are they a small business that's, kind of doing their thing? I've found that most companies generally are good actors and they want to be within the rules. The thing that I find hard to understand is why a lead developer on a team is afraid to ask their boss for a license to something. But they say, "Hey, I'm going to need this new MacBook Pro. It's $6,000, but I
yeah.
need it because I need it and I need it." And then they just write a check. It's like for some reason, hardware, they're like, "Yeah, I need the best and greatest. You need this $129 fluent assertions library." Oh, no, 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 no. We can't ask for $100.
There is a couple of things here though, because the MacBook is sort of a toy for you. Oh, you have a new thing to play around with.
Right.
The MassTransit thing, and I've seen it with other libraries working in projects in companies. Some developers who just really love to write code, they find this is an excuse to actually write their own version, and it usually goes as terribly as you'd expect. Because if you don't know the know-how of building something like that, it can actually be quite tricky to do if you need advanced
Yeah.
features.
What was one of the comments in Reddit? Oh, it should only take me about 10 hours to do this.
10 hours, yeah,
In the
great.
last 5 years alone, there's 10,000 hours in mass
Yeah,
transit. I mean, let's talk about time.
like
And that's just the last 5 years.
it's like, yes, if you know exactly what you want to build and exactly how you want to build it, it might take you a month, but you're missing all of the years of experience that made the project what it is today, and you're not going to gain that in 10 hours, let alone a month, or the other way around.
Right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, but some people can, they can believe what they believe. And I saw the other thing. They said, what if I take V8 and then I use AI to tell it, take this repo and rewrite it as if it's completely new code. so they own the copyright. And then they said they're gonna monitor what is being added in V9, and then ask the AI to add it in the V8 version. I'm like, okay, give that a go, see how it goes, and if you have the cojones, put it in production. Let's see.
Right. Yeah.
Like I see a lot being flown around, and that I really do not agree with. Um,
That's the craziest one I've heard, actually.
yeah,
I've also, I mean, here's the thing. If someone's like, oh, yeah, so the reply to that one of write it yourself, it's like, dude, what are you missing? Fork V8, call it Rapid Transit or whatever you
yeah,
want, make it your own internal company packages. Because at least then when you leave the company, all the interfaces are the same and they can move to the real mass transit without a whole lot of headache. They just get away with your little thing, and that's fine. It's the interfaces, it's the commonality. There
yeah,
was I think it was last year Microsoft said for .NET 9 they were going to make their own like base
yeah,
interfaces for an eventing framework. And of course, many people on Reddit are like, "This is why Microsoft has to provide everything out of the box for free so that we don't have to make these decisions."
yeah,
How has that worked out, really?
yeah. I made this post that said Microsoft just hired me to lead a team that takes popular public NuGet packages and makes the internal project. We're gonna call it the External Libraries Internal Team or Elite. It's like great.
That'd be fun.
Still waiting for a phone call. I don't think we're gonna get one.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
not sure the phone's going to ring.
but on that topic, on the eventing framework, I think is what they called it. That they
Hmm.
pulled it back. I don't know if it's cancelled or it's just pulled back for now. But how do you think launching that would affect other libraries? Is it just a matter of all the libraries now having to ship a Microsoft.extensions.eventing.abstractions package that all of their things will now have to use this interface? And how do you even make an interface that is so universal for everyone's use case that every package has to follow?
You know, so there were a whole bunch of containers, and Microsoft produced MSDI, and people said, "Oh my God, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, it doesn't do that." And yet now 99% use it because it is Microsoft. So they are kind of the bull in the China shop. They're going to push around and it's just because people are going to use it. It's the out of the box learn.microsoft.com is very well written, a lot of samples, it pulls a lot of people through. If they were to produce an eventing framework, I think they demonstrated early on they want the input and feedback from
Mhm.
the existing packages because the lowest common denominator thing doesn't add a whole lot of value. I mean, when you look at what something like Mass Transit or Wolverine or any of these solutions do, sagas, routing slips, retry patterns, recovery patterns, would they map, all the resilience stuff in? It's different in a messaging world than it is like an HTTP world because
Mhm.
messaging is durable and there's other things you have to do. So there is a lot of complexity beyond just consuming a message from a queue and producing a message to a queue or a topic. I mean, it's a lot more than that. And some people, the way they use mass transit, they're just literally doing a publish and consume to do durable async methods. And could an eventing framework address those concerns? Sure. I mean, it's fairly basic. They'd probably support, Azure Service Bus and probably RabbitMQ out of the box. Would they support SQS, or would that be a political problem that
Mhm.
somebody else has to deal with? So
Yeah.
then you're dealing with, a vendor issue. Whereas mass transit supports SQS all day long and doesn't care. You can go between any of them. But one of the things when we started, I want to say it was like Mass Transit 4 or 5. Again, we're going back to like 2016 here. The decision was made to have a common core of mass transit, but then make it so that there are specific interfaces for every broker type,
Mhm.
every persistence type, and have it rely down to kind of the base pipeline engine because they are so different. So yes, there is a message type and there is a consumer type that consumes something. And knowing Microsoft, their eventing framework would probably be more like map get, where they would just say like map consume or something and
Yeah.
do the whole what do they call it? Minimal API approach to building consumers versus, requiring interfaces and
Yeah.
things like that. So would they provide some capabilities? Sure. Would one of the top priority items on mass transit's roadmap be to embrace those interfaces and extend them? Remember that old Microsoft phrase, embrace and
I
extend?
do. I do. And there's another one after that.
Yeah. Extinguish.
Yeah. We don't talk
Yeah,
about that. That's a different
yeah,
Microsoft.
that's a different one. This is Satya's Microsoft now.
Yeah,
As I more refer to it, the Scott Goo Microsoft,
yeah,
because I think he was the one that definitely. So when I mentioned that alt.net thing earlier in 2007, Scott Goo and Scott Hanselman were both there,
yeah.
and that's where they first unveiled ASP.NET MVC. And I think that was, I think, one of the pivotal turning points where Microsoft really started to listen to the community,
Well, yeah,
especially the open
because
source.
Rails was out of hand. Like everyone was moving.
Everyone was going to Rails, and Microsoft needed an answer.
Yeah, it's like, well, let's do the same thing, but in C sharp.
Right. Win.
Ship it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they keep doing that. I think in that sense, Microsoft is like the Apple of software development for developer tools. They just see what's around and they make it better when, well, at least they try. They
Hmm.
repackage it and then they ship it. I want to talk just for this last section of the chat about open source in general. I don't know
Hmm.
if you saw it, but Dylan Beatty a couple of days ago released a great video on open source sustainability with Automapper, Mediator, MassTransit's move as a catalyst to the discussion. And he had some incredible points. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend you check it out on his YouTube channel. But to sum it up, or just to ask a question on the back of that video, do you think that the fate of every open source project is to either monetize or die?
So you mentioned Dylan's video. I did watch that
Yeah.
actually. It was like a 10-minute video.
Yes.
I mean, it was titled Mass Transit, which, over the past 2 weeks, my monitoring of social channels for that phrase has been pretty high.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, no, it was and I thought it was a very well stated kind of video. He kind of covered the things. He talked about monetization and mass transit. I think back to like the XKCD joke where it's like, you have this entire, complete ecosystem, and then here's this little, kid from Nebraska that's
Yeah.
got this little block that's like keeping the whole thing up and running. I was born in Nebraska, by the way.
Oh wow. It,
So, it hit home.
yeah, but it's mass transit actually there.
So when we first started mass transit, we had never even thought that it would ever turn into anything that would be it is today. I mean, we wrote it because we didn't want to create infrastructure in our respective companies that was doing the same thing. We wanted to share knowledge, we wanted to get feedback. And a lot of the, let's just call them bugs, a lot of the bugs that would have been in mass transit have been feted out by companies using it or by people using it are like, hey, I know you wrote this with your local SQL server, but when I go to Azure SQL, it does this. It's like, oh, so we need to account for that extra condition. Or, the variables of open source and people using it across, so many different environments. It's like anything, it takes works on my machine to works on 150,000 machines. So you have a much more likelihood of being able to put stuff in production. So for us to say at the beginning, it's like, okay, let's get a CLA and let's make sure we set up a corporate entity and we'll assign all the IP to the corporate entity and do all this stuff when we're really just lighting an assembly that talks to MSMQ. Nobody thinks that that's going to blow up.
Yeah.
How it did and how it grew, and when we came up with NuGet, which, NuGet was actually, there's a whole story about NuGet. I don't know if you know the history, but we originally created a project called New, which was actually using the Rails engine to deploy .NET packages. It was the craziest thing ever.
Really?
Yes, there's
I
a
did
whole history
I
behind New.
don't know that.
Yeah, and so then NuGet came out, and it became, what it is today. And again, it was a long conversation with a lot of the people at Microsoft to make that happen. Um, Going forward from that, so then we went to starting to think about, okay, now this is bigger, we're going to make it larger. We started speaking at conferences, uptick in growth. At some point about 5 years ago, I thought, this is getting really big, especially post COVID. Um, how sustainable could it be? That's when I introduced the support model. I wanted to go with that freemium model. And, for something like Linux, where you have companies buying like, SUSE Linux or Red Hat Linux, and even Red Hat's a company now, it's all just licensed
Yeah.
software now. It just happens to be open source.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's eventually there. I think monetization of developer tools has always been very difficult. It's different. It's like if you have a SaaS platform and people want to use it, like now, does anybody still host Jira, or does everybody just use Jira Cloud? I mean,
Yeah.
Atlassian Cloud, does anybody still use that stuff? Nobody wants to manage that because it's like managing your own Kafka cluster. It's a nightmare to manage. But like running RabbitMQ is easy. So, I feel like it's one of those things where for it to be sustainable for companies, it has to live beyond an individual. And when I look at the contribution graph, everybody, likes to think that mass transit has a ton of contributors, and the best contributors are the one that contribute the one line fix to make it work on their machine.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this works in my environment because you don't have that.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, people in Windows are great because I don't use Windows. I haven't in years, and
Yeah.
so when something doesn't work in Windows, it's like, oh, that's nice to know.
Yeah.
Um, I do think that as a project reaches a certain size, it has to move to a model that's sustainable
Hmm.
because companies in general will not just pay for something that they don't have to pay for.
Yeah.
I mean, it's standard business sense. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, if we can meet at the park for free or if we can meet at the library for free, why would we set up an office?
Yeah.
If we can go to a co-working space for $20 a month, why would we set up an office for $20,000 a month?
Yeah.
It's so I just think that I think he's right in a lot of those points, and I liked his video. It just seems to me like at some point it has to be sustainable
Yeah.
because the breadth is huge. I mean, I I can't even guess the dark number of people using mass transit. The survey comments were great. It was eye opening just
Yeah.
how many people use it. So
So
it's almost overwhelming for an individual support and
yeah.
maintain, which is why I've got to grow an organization around it because
Yeah,
it's
no, like for me, it was overwhelming for a very minorly popular NuGet package. I can only imagine what it is for something like mass transit. What advice, I want to leave everyone with this, but what advice do you have for open source authors?
I actually really like this question. Do it. If you're going to be coding, the best way to learn is to get people to look at your code. I mean, if you're like an individual developer or a curious developer at an organization or just getting started, you know, and you actually so I was a problem solver. I took apart my vacuum cleaner, well, my mom's vacuum cleaner when I was like 8 years old. Don't ask if I got it back together, but I knew how it worked after that. know? If you're curious, what the industry needs is curious developers that are willing to learn and benefit from the knowledge of others. If you build an open source project, every now and then you'll see a post on Reddit that's like, "Hey, I just created this new mapping tool and it lets me map entities from one type to another." And you'll get one person that's like, "Why would you write that? Just use AutoMapper." And then you'll get another person that's like, "Hey, I like what you did. You might consider doing this. You might consider doing that." And they get that feedback. And now you can even just go into your GitHub thing and say, GitHub Copilot, what sucks about this code? And it will come up and tell you. It's like, well, you aren't catching exceptions and you aren't doing this, and that's going to be a way to learn. And especially now with the AI tools, I feel like the hardest part about AI is asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Which used to be the hardest part about finding information was knowing the right search terms to type into Google.
Yeah.
So, if you're going to create an open source project, even if your aspirations are just it's solving a problem for you and you got permission from your employer or you're just on your own, do it in the open source. Get the feedback. I mean, it's been the most rewarding way to connect with the developer community over the past 17 years. I mean, I love it. I wouldn't be answering Discord questions at 9:30 on a
Yeah.
Saturday night if I didn't care about the people using the software. So,
Yeah.
it's a great way to meet people. I mean, ask anybody. It's a great thing on your resume. Of course, now it's not a great thing on my resume. They're like, "Wait, so you work this mass transit thing? You're still going to do that if we hire you, right?" It's like, "Yeah." And they're like, okay. So what's most important to you?" It's like, "Well, if you pay me enough, I won't spend as much time on it."
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, there's no disadvantage to doing it, especially going in with that. But just recognize that if you do have a unique solution that solves a problem, people are going to gravitate around that, and they're going to see value in that, especially in the .NET ecosystem. I mean, I look at the NPM ecosystem, and there's like a package that adds two strings together. I'm like,
Yeah.
are you kidding me?
There's the you know the meme now, the is even and is odd packages.
Yes,
They
yes, that's what I mean.
like what the oh
And I mean, God, what was the term I saw the other day? Oh, vibe coding. I didn't even know
yeah
this was a thing. Apparently, it's just like bang the AI until something that works comes out of it. And I'm
yeah
just like, how is that a thing? I mean,
I know
if you're, I love I've always been a problem solver. It destroys relationships when what's the old meme where it's like someone asks you, it's like, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do about this. It's like, well, you need to do this. It's like, I was looking for empathy, not an
yeah
answer.
yeah yeah
So, problem solving, curiosity, those are the things that are going to breed the next generation of innovations from
Mhm.
development. So, by all means, get out in the community, get feedback, find people to use it, do it to solve a problem. Even if it's just curiosity and then you end up not doing it, put that right up front in the README. This is fun for me.
yeah
If you're using this your business, be aware I will stop working on this tomorrow and you have no recourse. So,
yeah
you've been warned.
yeah.
So,
Well, Chris, that's all the questions I had. Thank you so much for doing this. It's very insightful, both for me personally, but also for everyone watching the community. Like, if you like this video and you're worried about the change or anything, just share it with your team, with your manager. It sounds like MassTransit has a bright future ahead of it, and I'm really excited to see where it goes from here and with V9 out, and whatever that looks like in terms of open source, closed source, license, whatever. Maybe if it's closed, I'm gonna try to crack it for my own fun. We'll see. But thank you so much for joining me again.
yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been fun. It's a great way to wake up.
Awesome. And for you watching, as always, keep coding.